Hi class, welcome to, this is our continuing lessons in micro and macroeconomics. I've talked about elasticity in the last lesson, and the homework question from last lesson was relating to elasticity, and the question was, what is unit elastic? And unit elastic is when there's a price change, okay, if it's a price increase or a decrease, and the quantity demanded changes exactly the same amount by the change in price, okay? So unit elastic means that the price change and the quantity demand change are equivalent to each other. And unit elastic means that your elasticity of demand is equal to 1. Okay? So that's the answer to the homework question. Moving on, we're going to continue this elasticity topic, try to finish this up by this lesson, and move on to other more exciting topics in microeconomics. All right? So let's talk about, when you talk about elasticity, I really want to start off with a chart and how this relates to that equation we talked about. So let me write that equation what I talked about was important and how that relates to our chart, right? I said total revenue, right? Total revenue, or TR, is equal to the price, right, times the quantity, okay? And total revenue is really important for a producer, right? Because a producer is thinking, well, how much money can I, he always wants his revenue to go up, right? Because they're like, I want to make the most amount of profits. I want to make the most amount of money. That's what a producer wants to make, right? So that's why it's really important, because total revenue can be broken down into price and quantity, okay? The reason why we discuss elasticity is that if I want to increase this total revenue, right? If I want to increase this total revenue, there's two ways of doing it. I can either increase the price or I can increase the quantity, right? That's the ways of increasing total revenue. But see, what happens is economics tells us that if we increase the price, the quantity actually goes down, right? And that's a big problem because we don't know how that's going to affect revenue. And that's the reason we talk about elasticity. All right, so let's talk about this chart and how we can discuss if it's elastic or not elastic, or inelastic, excuse me, if it's elastic or inelastic or unit elastic, based on the changes that price and quantity and how that affects total revenue, all right? So I'm going to have 4 columns, all right? So it's price, quantity demanded, total revenue, and price elasticity of demand, all right? So let's start off from here, and we're going to start off with the first column being price, okay? So this is going to be price, all right? That's 1. What's our second column? It's going to be quantity demanded, right? I'm going to short it for QD, okay? QD is 1 column. My third column is going to be total revenue, and that's going to be TR, okay? TR is the same thing as total revenue, right? Total revenue is TR, same thing, okay? And then my last one is the elasticity of demand, okay? Starts for ED or elasticity of demand, okay? All right, my elasticity of demand, so we have 4 equations. Okay, so whenever we talk about elasticity, I say, okay, let's talk about the price change first, and how that affects quantity demanded, and then how that affects total revenue, and then we can talk about elasticity. Make sense? So we first start off with price change, okay? So our first example here with the price change is going to be that there's an increase in price, okay? There's an increase in price. All right, so in this example, if there's an increase in price, my quantity goes down. My quantity demanded goes down. So here's what I said, right? So I said that my P goes up, my QD goes down. Well, what happens to my total revenue in this one? Let's say that it actually goes down. Okay, so my price went up, quantity demanded goes down, my total revenue actually goes down. This whole thing actually goes down. What does that mean? For those of you who kind of understand the perspective of elasticity, what that really means is that the elasticity is greater than 1, right? It's greater than 1. What does that mean? It's elastic. Okay? Okay? It's elastic, right? So my price went up, quantity demanded goes down, my total revenue, the whole thing went down, so that means that this has to be elastic. Okay? What's my next example? Well, let's talk about if my price went up, right? But my quantity demanded went down, but my total revenue actually went up. What does that mean? Well, that means that my price went up, my quantity demanded goes down, but my total revenue actually went up, right? That means my price has been more effective than quantity demanded. What does that mean? It means that it's inelastic, right? Or my ED is less than 1. Okay? That means my ED here was greater than 1, here it was less than 1. Okay? All right, so let's talk about what happens if my price went down this time. Okay? If your price went down, my quantity demand actually goes up, all right? So it went up, okay? And really speaking, nothing happened to my total revenue, okay? So my price went up, my price went down, my QD goes, excuse me, let's fix that actually. My example that I want to talk about today, let's cancel that. Let's talk about actually that it went up, okay? Same thing, went up, QD actually goes down, right? But nothing happens to my total revenue, okay? So price went up, quantity went down, total revenue, nothing happens. What does that mean? It means that it's unit elastic, okay? Unit elastic. Or ED is equal to 1, okay? All right, so the next 3 examples are going to talk about if my price goes down, okay? So if my price goes down, my quantity demanded obviously is going to go up, right? And my total revenue is actually going to go up in this case. What does that mean? Well, my price went down, my quantity demanded went up, and my total revenue is actually went up. That means that it's actually elastic because my quantity demanded the price, okay? So that means that it's elastic. Or it's greater than 1, right? You guys should be pros by now getting to this. The second example here is it's going to go down. Quantity demanded again is going to go up. But in this case, the total revenue actually goes down. What does that mean? It's the exact opposite scenario. It means that it's inelastic, correct? Inelastic. And you guys would probably guess the last reason. Last one, okay? Yeah, kind of surprising, right? Down, right? Price went down. My quantity actually goes, my price goes down, my quantity demanded goes up, right? TR stays the same, right? Constant, right? What that means is that it's unit elastic, okay? So when the changes kind of cancel out each other, it means that it's unit elastic. Or equal to 1, okay? So this is the basic graph, okay? This chart talks about what really dominates, right? So if my price, quantity demanded, and my TR, what really talks about is that, you know, what is the bigger effect on revenue? Is it price or quantity? And based on that, we can dictate if it's elastic, unit elastic, or inelastic, okay? And this is the chart that can kind of walk you through each of these, okay? So I hope this helps a little bit out for all of you in terms of elasticity and how it affects total revenue. You might see this in a multiple choice, you know, or a free response, but either way, it's really important in understanding elasticity, okay? That being said, the next thing I'm going to write down, I'm going to show you guys, is a graph. And the graph is kind of will go over the regions of a demand graph, okay? And how that you can try to show the elasticity, okay? And when you have a demand graph, okay? Let's all try to think of a demand graph, and I hope all of you are experts at demand graphs at this point, right? So when you have a graph, right, and you have price, and you have quantity, right, and you have a downward sloping demand graph like we always do, except for if it's Jiffin good, right? We said if it's Jiffin good, it has an upward sloping demand graph, but for 99% of the time we have a downward sloping demand graph, okay? So we said that for a downward sloping demand graph, does the slope actually change? The slope here and the slope here are exactly the same, right? Now here's the tricky part. When it comes to elasticity, right, it doesn't work that way. The reason being is that elasticity always deals with the percent change in quantity demanded versus the percent change in price, right? So if I have a market price, right, somewhere here in the middle, okay, what really means is that this region right here, okay, is actually elastic, okay? ED here is greater than 1, or it's elastic. Right here, when my price change and the quantity demanded change are equivalent to each other, what's going to happen is that my ED is actually equal to 1, and it's unit elastic. Okay? What's going to happen here, So my ED, you can probably guess this one, is less than 1, and it's inelastic. Okay? So understand that if in a slope and a demand graph really doesn't change at different points, but when it comes to elasticity, it actually does change. Okay? And this concept takes a little longer to understand, but if you break it down in terms of percent changes and maybe give yourself some examples, it might be a little more help. Okay? Maybe down the line when we're doing our practice problems, we can go over those. But understand that this is how the region is split in terms of just the different elasticities and how they tend to work. Okay? Now, what does it mean when something is inelastic or elastic in a graph? Okay? So let me show you something that is perfectly elastic. Okay? What does it mean that's perfectly elastic? If it's perfectly elastic, okay? This is perfectly elastic, okay? If it's perfectly elastic, the way, I remember this graph, and I hope this helps for you guys, is that when I take the perfectly elastic graph, the trick that I try to use is use this word E, okay? How do you draw E, right? E is like this, right? That's an E, correct? I hope everyone knows what an E is like. A perfectly elastic graph, what you do is, it kind of looks like this part of an E, right? Kind of looks like this, okay? So how is this perfectly elastic and how can you explain this, right? This is a demand graph, okay? So demand line. How do you know it's perfectly elastic? Well, a perfectly elastic line says that for every different change, right, between quantities, right, quantity 1 and quantity 2, the price, right, stays the same, right? When we said that, well, elasticity of demand is equivalent to the percent change in the quantity demanded or the percent change in price, right? And if the elasticity is infinite, right, then, or it's perfectly elastic, well, the changes in quantity, right, the price is not going to change a bit, right? Because the change in quantity demanded is going to dominate the change in price. And what that means is the price stays constant. So this is called perfectly elastic, right? And the trick to remember this is when you draw perfectly elastic, it kind of looks like this, okay? It kind of looks like that E, right? If you make this graph, it kind of looks like an E, right? If I draw that top line, it kind of looks like an E. Obviously, don't draw this E on a test, okay? They're going to mark you wrong, okay? But this is just a trick that I use, okay? Now, a perfectly elastic graph, okay, where does it lie? It lies in a perfectly competitive market, okay? It lies in a perfectly competitive. And we talked about competitive markets, right? Perfectly competitive markets, what happens is firms are price takers, right? Remember that concept we talked about a little bit before? We said price takers are price takers because the price is dictated by all of the firms rather than one particular firm, right? So let's take a market that's perfectly maybe competitive. Let's say, I have no idea. Well, let's say milk, okay? The market of milk is perfectly competitive in our example, okay? What that really means is that this price, okay, let's say the market price is like $5 a gallon, right? $5 a gallon is the price that everyone pays, right? Now, the advantage of that is, regardless of what quantity, when it's perfectly elastic, right? If it's perfectly elastic, regardless of what quantity I buy, it's still $5. Does that make sense? Okay. So obviously these don't exist for a gallon. If you buy a gallon of milk and 2 gallons of milk, there is a difference, right? You tend to pay more. Okay. But this is a made-up example. All right. But if it's perfectly elastic, what that says is that no matter what quantity I have or consume, the cost is still going to be the same. Okay. Quantity 2, cost is $5. Quantity 3, cost is $5. Okay. Now, if I have to consume 2 in total, it's $10. But for every quantity, the price doesn't change. Okay. So this is a perfectly competitive market, right? In our example, it was the milk market. Well, no matter what I buy or what quantity I buy, even the 50th gallon of milk is still going to cost $5, right? It's true. Okay. So don't get that confused. Okay. I'm not saying that the 4th gallon of all the 4 gallons together are going to cost $5. That's not true. What I'm trying to tell you is that for even the 4th gallon is going to cost the same as the 1st gallon. Okay, and that's in a perfectly competitive market, right? It's kind of true when you go to a grocery market. If you buy 10 gallons of milk, they're not going to say, oh, sir, well, the second gallon of milk is going to cost you more than the first, right? It doesn't make sense, right? So the gallons of milk are going to cost the same no matter how many you buy, and it's a perfectly competitive market. Perfectly elastic, it's sort of like an E, right? It's sort of like an E, right? Kind of looks like an E. If you draw this out, kind of looks like an E, right? That's the way you remember it, okay? I hope we kind of move on from perfectly elastic. Let's move on to perfectly inelastic, okay? Perfectly inelastic, I have another trick for you, okay? And I hope this helps for you guys, right? Perfectly inelastic is kind of like the exact opposite, okay? So perfectly inelastic, what you do is you take the first letter, right? My trick says first letter, which is of inelastic, I, right? Draw an I, okay? And it kind of looks like an I, right? If you take this part out, right? It kind of looks like this long line. A perfectly inelastic line will kind of look like this, okay? What does it mean if it's perfectly inelastic? Well, no matter what I do, right? Even a slight change, right? I can charge infinitely more, okay? So even at, for $1 million, right? If it's perfectly inelastic, I can charge whatever I want, okay? So what does that mean? Typically, it exists in a monopoly. Okay, let's say that it's diamonds, right? De Beers is you guys probably heard, is a monopolist, right? They have a big control over the market. Well, they could charge whatever they want for a diamond, okay? They can say maybe $50 for a diamond or $500,000 for a diamond. It doesn't matter because they control the market, so it's perfectly inelastic, okay? So perfectly inelastic says no matter what my quantity is, I can charge no matter what I want for the price, right? Do you guys, everyone see that? Okay. Perfect elastic. Okay, so perfect inelastic, the way you draw is you have an I, right? And this I, this part, the stand on line, you kind of draw it like this, okay? Straight up, okay, like that. So you can charge whatever price point you want in a perfectly inelastic, and that generally lies when you have the complete control of a market, okay? Everyone understand that? This is perfectly elastic, okay? This is perfectly inelastic. Perfectly inelastic, I can charge whatever price I want. Perfectly elastic, it's a competitive market, there's only one price, okay? So the two main concepts are perfectly elastic and perfectly inelastic, and I hope everyone understands the concepts behind those. All right, next concept we're gonna go over is the cross-elasticity price of demand, okay? And that's pretty important in when it comes to economic analysis. If you guys want to go into business and things like that, it's really important because every business worries about their competitor, right? And there's a lot of fancy analysis that goes behind this concept, but it's really important. But cross-price elasticity of demand, I'm going to write this down, is extremely important. Cross-price elasticity of demand, okay? And let me write the equation, and then I can explain to you. But before I write the equation down, I want to explain to you guys the concept behind cross-price elasticity of demand. Cross-price elasticity of demand asks one question, okay? It asks the question, what effect on quantity demand, okay? What effect on quantity demand, QD, right? Quantity demand of one product, okay? Will a price change, and I normally write change as delta, but that's okay, I'm gonna write the word down here. Will price change in another product have? Another product have. Right? So it basically asks the question, what happens when I change the price, what happens to my product, right? Say I'm building, one of the previous examples I had was I made these markers. So say I'm making these markers, right? I particularly made these markers, right? And my competitor changes the price of a particular marker, okay? So what effect is it going to have, okay, on my markers if the price of my competitor, he changes the price, right? So what price what does that happen, right? So the reason why a lot of these things are used is, say, you have a monopolist and, he's trying to buy out another company. Well, a lot of analysis that's being done behind this is it going to change the prices for consumers, right? It's really important to think about this stuff, okay? And the way you write this down, cross-price elasticity of demand, is on an equation, okay? And cross-price elasticity of demand is CPED, okay? I'm going to short that. CPED is cross-price elasticity of demand, okay? Is the percent change in quantity demand of product Y divided by the percent change in price of product X. Okay? So that basically says that if the other product X, changes their price, right? How does that affect in the amount of people that consume my product Y? Okay, so say my competitor's product, okay, and say my marker is called X, and his marker is called Y, or excuse me, his product is called X and my product is called Y, and he changes his product price of X. It's saying, well, me as a product maker who I make this product Y, how's that going to affect my price, right? Because I'm always worried about my price and how much profit I'm going to make as a producer. And cross-price elasticity of demand tries to answer exactly that. Now, the important thing to understand in a CPED, or a cross-price elasticity of demand, is that if the cross-price elasticity of demand has a positive sign, right? I'm going to write that down here, okay? If the cross-price elasticity of demand has a positive sign, okay, what does that mean? Well, it says that if there's a percent change in price, there's a percent change in quantity demand, it means that it's a substitute good. Substitute. Okay? That means that if my person, is increasing the price, say my competitor increases the price of his markers, right? Obviously, more people are going to consume my marker because I haven't changed my price, so it's cheaper, right? But if it has a negative sign, right, that means that it's a complementary, right? Complementary. Right? So say that, I don't know, whiteboards, right? They're complementary to this marker. Say that their prices have gone up, right? And the way that's going to work is that if the prices have gone up and the people that are going to consume the marker is going to go less, it's a complementary good, okay? Understand that cross-price elasticity of demand, depending on the sign, can talk about positive versus negative, okay? Positive sign for a CPED, it's substitute good. Negative sign is a complementary good, okay? And the way you can think of that is that your competitors and how that affects your profits, okay? Same logic of, behind that. The next concept we're going to talk about is the income elasticity of demand, okay? And you know how cross-price elasticity of demand discusses, well, if my competitor changes the price, right, or another product changes the price, how that's going to affect my product? Well, income elasticity of demand talks about what happens if someone's income changes, right? How does that affect the way that someone demands my product? And a lot of that is intuitive, and I'm sure you guys will try to understand that more easily than the even cross-price elasticity of demand is pretty intuitive, but income elasticity I think is extremely intuitive because obviously if you make more money and things like that, it makes more sense, right? If you make more money, you can consume more in general. Make less money, you can consume less in general. I hope it's a little more intuitive when it comes to that concept, but we'll go over that just in case. Okay? So let's go over income elasticity of demand. Income elasticity of demand. Okay? Well, what is the income elasticity of demand? Income elasticity of demand talks about if the person's if the person's consumer's income changes, how does that affect the change in the quantity demanded of a particular good, right? So in equation terms, it's just like that, okay? So my income elasticity of demand is equal to the percent change in the consumption, okay, in consumption of a good, divided by the percent change in the consumption in the consumer's income. Right? Now, let me give you an example. Okay, so say for some reason that you all of a sudden make more money, right? The percent change in consumer's income goes up, right? It went up by 10%. You made 10% more money. Okay, well, if your consumption of a good, let's choose a good, say for some reason you like pizza, right? Let's just take a reason you like pizza. If your income goes up by 10%, let's say that your consumption of pizza goes up by 10%. Okay? You can afford more money, you like pizza, you're going to go ahead and buy more pizza. Okay? Similarly, if you make less money, you're going to consume less pizza because you can't afford as much. Okay? The way we relate to this is that, is it a normal good or an inferior good? And the way we can tell that is if this income elasticity of demand is positive, right? If it's a positive sign, then it's a normal good. Okay? And if it's the opposite, it's inferior good, for the most part, understand it's a normal good if it's a positive sign, right? You make more money, you consume more of that particular good. And that's basically income elasticity of demand, right? And it's kind of similar if it's greater than 1, it's elastic, less than 1, inelastic, equal to 1, unit elastic, right? So income elasticity of demand and cross-price elasticity of demand are extremely important concepts to relating income and the price of other goods to the consumption of your own good, right? And as a consumer, as a producer, you constantly have to think about those kind of things, right? What affects my profits, okay? And I hope this stuff makes more sense. As usual, I always recommend doing more examples. The last concept I'm going to go over for you guys today, before I kind of wrap this up, is the idea of the the incidence of tax on the incidence of tax on supplies and consumers. What does that really mean? Okay, so this is a fancy concept called incidence of taxes on suppliers and consumers. I think, yep, that's exactly what it is. Supplier and consumers. Okay. And if I had a graph, okay, what it really means is that, this is your price, your quantity, price and quantity, your demand, right, and your supply. What that really means is that, say for some reason that the government has proposed taxes, okay? And I told you before that if there's taxes, right, what really means is that the input costs go up, right? It's kind of the same thing, right? Taxes go up, my supply shifts to the left, right? It's supply plus my taxes, right? I told you guys that my supply decreases, the cost of producing that goes up, right? I said the same thing. Why is elasticity important is because the way this elasticity of demand is, right? Say it's like this, or let's say that it's more inelastic, right? This is let's say this is another demand graph. Depending on how elastic it is, the supplier will translating that to the cost or not. Let me explain that in a little more. Okay, I'll take a couple more seconds. If it's more inelastic, okay, the supplier can go ahead and make the taxes that have gone up and translate that into making the good more expensive. If it is elastic, okay, he is going to go ahead and absorb those costs. He or she is going to go ahead and absorb those costs and make sure that it doesn't translate to higher costs. Why is that, you say? Well, the more inelastic something is, the consumer, if the prices go he won't be a big change. He'll consume just as much, or a little less. But if it's elastic, then if it's elastic, then if there's a certain changes in prices, if the prices go up, all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I'm not going to consume as much, right? So depending on if it's elastic or inelastic, the supplier is going to decide if the taxes, right? The taxes are going to go ahead and translate that into higher prices or not so much higher prices, okay? And that's a pretty important concept, right? In wrapping up this whole elasticity chapter, I really want you guys to understand that elasticity thinks about the responsiveness to price changes, okay? And understand what's unit elastic, understand what's elastic, what's inelastic, okay? Elasticity of demand is greater than 1 if it's elastic, less than 1 if it's inelastic, equal to 1 if it's unit elastic. Cross price of elasticity discusses the changes in your product consumption when it comes to the changes in some other goods price change, okay? Income elasticity talks about how your consumption of your good changes depending on the consumer's income. And lastly speaking, taxes relate to elasticity because the more elastic something is, the supplier is really worried about making sure the prices go up or not, okay? And if it's more inelastic, then the supplier will go ahead and if there's higher taxes, he'll take those extra taxes and put it on and latch it on and your prices of that good will go up and the consumer will consume a little less but not as much. So it's really important to understand elasticity from a producer standpoint, okay? Extremely important, and even from a consumer standpoint. So with that being said, here's my question. The next time we go over, explain to me what cross price of elasticity is and tell me the equation of cross price of elasticity, okay? In the next chapter, we'll go over one other concept which talks about the determinants of elasticity, and then we'll move on to a new topic in macroeconomics. Hope to see you guys in the next lesson. Thank you so much for joining me today.